On August 14, 1912, a New Zealand-based newspaper called the Rodney and Otamatea Times ran an article that read, "The furnaces of the world are now burning about 2 million tons of coal a year. When this burned, uniting with oxygen, it adds about 7 million tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere yearly. This tends to make the air a more effective blanket for the Earth and to raise its temperature. The effect may be considerable in a few centuries." The article was ignored, and the world got hotter. On the 28th of June 1914, in Sarajevo, Serbia, a Serbian assassin by the name of Gavrilo Princip sat in a cafe. That day, he had been part of an assassination attempt. His friends were dead and captured. The plan had failed. As 19-year-old Gavrilo looked up from his table, he noticed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's open car driving slowly in front of the cafe. He rose to his feet, walked briskly to the side of the car, unsheathed his pistol, and fired one, and only one, single shot into the cabin. The Austrian Archduke was dead, and our planet was thrown into its First World War. Austria briskly declared war on Serbia. Russia came to the defense of its little brother and declared war in turn on Austria. Germany allied with Austria and declared war on both Serbia and Russia. France, soon after, allying with Russia and Serbia, declared war on Germany and Austria. Germany, as part of their Schlieffen Plan, moved through neutral Belgium to attack France, committing war atrocities as they went. The English, seeing this, quickly declared war on Germany and Austria. The modern age of war had begun, and the world got hotter. On September 1st, 1939, Germany, under the control of Hitler's Nazi Party, invaded Poland, beginning the Second World War. It seems that the world had learned nothing from the first time. In an age where science and technology were starting to pave the way to a human society distanced from their tribal tendencies, the archaic human mind stopped it right in its tracks and showed the world that nothing had changed. 60 million died. 60 million human lives tossed away. With 30 million seconds in a year, a human life was lost every 3 seconds during this 6-year period of unparalleled brutality. In the conferences and courtrooms of the aftermath, the world screamed out in unison, "Never again." People were massacred in the fields, and people were massacred in their homes, and the world got hotter. In the 1960s, funded by the United States Department of Defense, the first internet prototype was created, dubbed ARPANET by its creators. For the first time, it allowed multiple computers to communicate on a closed network. This invention wasn't on the combined human consciousness until 30 years later, with the rise of the internet we all know. The rise of the internet gave the world hope that their cries of never again was truly now a feasible concept. The hope grew as smartphones were placed into the hands of nearly everyone on the planet. But a change occurred. The rise of social media and the addictive nature of internet platforms led to a deficit in other crucial areas of the human attention span, the reading of literature and the reading of history. Without the inarguable knowledge that books provide, the internet now provided people with their opinions. Any party with enough money or ambition could take over the internet narrative, and they could convince those who had never read or experienced the horrors of history for themselves of anything. Convince them to forget the horrors of the Soviet Union. Convince those who had never skipped a meal in their lives to support communism. Convince them that the earth was flat, and convince them of anything else. Because when they didn't know their history, their opinions were no longer formed on historical facts from books or experts, but by what motivated parties had told them to believe. This skewing of history, this destruction of fact and fiction, gave anyone the ability to create division, conflict, and hatred. Human hate grew towards each other as their opinions were made for them, as their thoughts came from someone else's head, and as the world got hotter. In 2032, as oil stores begin to plummet, the few nations with stores large enough to maintain militaries form a coalition to invade the remaining oil fields in central Siberia. The Russian military, with the world's greatest oil stores, puts up a worthy fight, but loses the oil fields eventually to the coalition's heightened manpower. For years now, as climate temperatures grew to supercriticality, the Siberian permafrost had been melting, releasing mass amounts of methane into the atmosphere, only making Earth's global warming ever worse. A lone oil drill operator reports to a Siberian drill site's hospital. His symptoms include fever, aches, and trouble breathing. Within hours after symptoms present themselves, he is dead. not before the mystery pathogen is spread to the whole of the camp. As the permafrost melts, pathogens that no organism on Earth had experienced since the last ice age expose themselves. With no immunity to these pathogens whatsoever, it spreads to the world, and the human death toll is astonishing. The Siberian drill operator functions as patient zero for the next great pandemic. The respiratory pathogen spreads across the planet, killing those infected within hours. A world crippled from lack of oil and constant war over the few remaining resources is ill-equipped to deal with such a health threat. Hundreds of millions die. Such a catastrophe is unprecedented by any previous pandemic or human event. But the dead are forgotten, as the last few drops of oil are pumped from the Siberian tundra, and the world got hotter. On August 14th, 2047, a newspaper article reads, "Extensive climate heating causing decimation of bee populations. Mass starvation expected to follow." By this point, humans had done it. Total reliance on fossil fuels has been converted to renewable means, and a new age of world peace began. A drop or stabilization in climate change was expected, but never came. The damage had already been done. The mass amounts of methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere caused the world to heat, melting more permafrost and releasing more methane. More methane released meant higher temperatures, and in turn, furthermore methane released. The climate of Earth was on a runaway train. The humans had made the changes, but it was too late. Constant damage to the atmosphere, and with ignorance to the factors of the greenhouse effect, the Earth grew hotter and hotter until nature finally broke. Bee populations fell and fell, food availability fell and fell. Too focused were the humans on squabbles of their own. Too much so were they focused on their greed, and too much so did they want to fight and die for their tribe. The human brain, the magnificent tool it was, retained too many aspects of the human ape ancestors to maintain a complex society. Too ingrained in their brains and motives was greed, and the willingness to succeed at the cost of another human's life, and the willingness to succeed at the cost of millions of lives. They were too mixed up in hating each other, in killing each other, and in stealing from the world to make the things they didn't need, that they forgot the one thing they did. They needed a place to live, an air to breathe. But even things so simple were now gone. Nature had been beaten by its own children, and the world got hotter, and the humans exhausted their fuel, and finally they both sizzled out into black.